it just all worked and flowed so well. It was fascinating to watch.
Today's guest is Wild Woman Shauna Hart. She's a wildlife photographer and naturalist living in northern Utah. She's on the board of directors at the Utah Wildlife Federation and a contributing photographer for Save People, Save Wildlife in Park City, Utah. Shauna is also a member of the Utah Wildlife Connectivity Committee and advocate for wildlife in areas of development in Utah. She's dabbled in photography all her life, but fell in love with landscape and wildlife photography when moving to Utah 6 years ago. Once she had her own personal experiences connecting with wildlife, she was hooked. Now on to the episode with Wild Woman Shauna Hart. Let's go. Hey everyone, I am here with my new friend, Shauna Hart. I'm so excited. This is the first time we've met.
Hello, hello. So glad we connected.
Yeah, me too. And you reached out to me and said, we should have a podcast conversation. And I was like, tell me why.
And I answered you, hopefully in a cogent way.
Well, we're here chatting, but I think it's so interesting. Like we've already, you and I have already talked about like how you got to where you were, being on the board of directors at the Utah Wildlife Federation. We were talking about all of the things, and I was like, "Tell me, Shauna, tell me how you got to be in this place, how you got to be here." And you said that, oh, here's what I love. You were like, oh, I just messaged people. I just started messaging people. And I'm like, this tracks.
Yes, I am known for that. In fact, president of the Utah Wildlife Federation, when he nominated me at the board meeting where I was voted in, said that very thing. She tracked me down on every social media account for 6 months. And here we are. Shauna, you are persistent to say the least. So anyway.
I love this. I feel like we need persistence if we're going to do good, but make good things happen in the world, you know?
I think that's important. It's an important characteristic, especially nowadays. People might talk and say things in this kind of agitated world and conversation or discourse. But those who really excel are the ones who feel passionate about what they're doing and then just keep doing it. I think I understood my own strengths. One of the experiences was in a trip to Germany. My dad was in the Air Force, so we were staying with friends at Ramstein Air Force Base over there, and I went into the little town early on a Saturday morning, and all four of the homes that were really close together had elderly women at the same time and almost at the same brushstroke cleaning their steps at 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning with a bucket of soap and water. And I thought, oh, that makes sense why I have this German propensity for organization and cleanliness and persistence and just making sure things get done. And that's actually, business wise where I've excelled. And it's also kept me going in wildlife photography. In fact, last week, the week before, I was getting very discouraged because I thought, am I really making a difference? What I'm doing, who I've talked to, who I've shared my photography with, the organizations that have auctioned off my photos, is there something meaningful that I'm going to leave behind? Because that's what I want to do. I want to give a voice to nature and to wildlife, specifically as far as connectivity issues go along the Rocky Mountains, and particularly in Utah. It's such an issue with development and growth in this state. So yeah, I think that's kind of where I am and who I am.
Do you think you are making a difference?
I hope so. I think little by little, I watched that movie the other day called A Million Miles Away.
Oh, I haven't seen that.
I think is it John Hernandez? Yeah, and I can give you the more details later, but he was Hispanic migrant farm worker as a child, and he applied to NASA 15 times for 25 to 30 years to try to get into the astronaut program. And I wept as I watched this story because it really reinvigorated to me. He knew who he was, he knew what his talents were, and he knew what he wanted to do. And he stuck with it.
And he didn't give up.
No, and he didn't give
Yeah.
up. And we're always going to have ups and downs, right? No matter what you do, no matter what vocation you're or your hobby or whatever, those who really excel and learn and make a difference keep at it day after day after day.
Tell me, and I know I build this is not an interview podcast, but I'm also learning a little bit about you. So tell me one small thing that you think you've made a difference in. I don't know if that's the right question, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I think it's a valid question in this realm. I think educating people on just the particulars about wildlife, the nature of wildlife, different species, what they do, where they go, birthing patterns, migration patterns, things relative to them in their community here in northern Utah, particularly. Because there's not one week that doesn't go by, especially in the last year when there's been so many people moving in and the local areas have Facebook pages and stuff that I'm connected to. And I'll post a picture, or I'll make a statement about something, and they'll say, I had no idea. What? There's bears here? Nobody told me. Or I had a woman in near Heber Valley near Park City who had a cougar in her backyard. She had a house built that was only a year old clear up on the top of the mountain because so many people are just building clear up to the top of the mountain. She had a cougar taking down mule deer in her backyard, and then he was caching it in their window well. And she was upset. She was castigating, and this was on social media, the mayor of this town and the people who didn't tell her there were cougars here, and all this kind of stuff. And had to stop her Amazon deliveries, and she moved out of the house for 3 weeks because she was afraid of this cougar. Well, I could go on and on about education again and whose responsibility that was to educate her, or her responsibility for learning. But people don't know where, as they're moving into places, developers don't tell them what kind of area they're moving in. Developers don't know a lot of times. One of the things and desires for the Utah Wildlife Federation that I've kind of been point and asked to do was to bring people to the table to discuss better coexistence between wildlife and man in newly developed areas. It shouldn't be an either or. We shouldn't either kill all the wildlife that cause problems with your cattle or whatever, or just let the wildlife go unabated and let them kill. I mean, there's got to be a way that we can coexist. And educating people and teaching them, I think I've started to make a little bit of a difference, right? In ripples from your own circle.
Yeah.
So your circle knows, and they tell others, or you get an opportunity to tell other people outside that circle, and then it kind of ripples. So I hopefully at least a little bit. Yes.
I think that's an amazing start.
Sure.
And we do have to kind of start with our like little inner circle and ripple outwards. And I think this is a conversation that's happening in a lot of places, right? Like especially like a lot of places out west, but anywhere that man collides with nature and like anywhere.
Right.
The world is an interesting place to be because we will always have this kind, this interplay between man and animals.
Correct. And my passion started actually for this area was finding a cow moose that had been hit on the highway.
Oh, good. I was going to ask you about that. This is the thing you told me about, so I'm dying to hear.
Well, there's several, but the first time I jumped out of the car and I just started bawling. My husband was like, oh gosh. And there were car parts all over. So we have several canyons in the area. I live in what we call Cache Valley. It's on the border of Idaho and Utah, northern Idaho.
Oh, wait, pause. Well known for its delicious cheese. Okay, go ahead.
Yes. Logan, Utah area. And that's actually where I track moose and wildlife in these canyons. Spend a lot of time.
Hang on, I might be interrupting this story. Are you scared of them if you're tracking them? Because I know moose can be really, they're big, and I know they can be pretty scary. I mean, I just had a mini conversation with somebody that was like, it's the moose that you got to watch out for.
Yes, but no. And the reason I say no, and until I have a death defying experience, I guess maybe I'll say that, but I've studied them and I continue to study them.
Mm.
So knowing their seasons, their behavior, what to look for, and how far and how close to get, because they'll let you know if they don't continue to do what animals do and you've interrupted them, their ears will go flat, they'll huff, they'll, start getting kind of antsy. And the only time, and the seasons too, the rut is right now this fall. So the bull moose shed their antlers, and it puts them into this extreme hormone rush through their bodies. And so they have a mating instinct and they want to fight the other males. They collect the cow moose and calves as a harem to mate with. And you definitely don't want to be less than 100 yards from a bull moose at this season. But let me tell you, when they drop their antlers in the winter and in January, they're cold and they're trying to find food and they're not so worried about anybody else. You can get a lot closer at a safe distance to photograph them and actually spend time and understand them a lot more. So no, I don't. I know too intuitively when I don't feel comfortable, or when
Mm-hmm.
I'm, when I just know I spent enough time out there.
Again, this is all about education, like spending the time to understand the animals and
Absolutely. You have to know what you're photographing. You really do.
even just observing from a far, far distance, what are their patterns and all of these things. All of the wildlife photographers are like, yeah, of course we do that. Well, I'm just a happen chance wildlife photographer.
Well, and that's what veers into the naturalist realm, right? Which
Hmm.
is I call myself that, trying to understand study. I think one of the most intense experiences I had where I learned the most was I was staying at a friend's house, high up in the mountains in Park City, and it was June. Was it June? I think it was early June. And a young yearling bull moose wandered onto the property. And he's still in his velvet. His antlers are barely starting to grow. But I could tell he was about a year old. He probably just kicked out from his mother, who was probably pregnant again with another calf at that time, which is what happens. And he was so curious, adolescent male, especially in the deer family, which is mule deers, elk, moose, are so curious. So he kept coming closer and closer, and I kept backing up, right, initially, because
Did you have your
again,
camera?
senses and
Did
understand.
you ever?
I did.
Okay.
So and he did this. He was in the yard probably morning. He would go away for a couple hours in the afternoon, and then we'd come back at night. So I spent 2.5, almost 3 days with him, almost continuously, sitting on the porch, watching him from 25 yards away, how he ate, how he relieved himself. I know that sounds terrible, but very interesting because moose have several stomachs. So
Part of life.
yes, and I really became aware and I understood for the first time that wildlife, every single waking minute is all about survival.
Mhm.
He didn't hardly close his eyes when he slept. He was alert and aware. His ears were going because moose can operate both eyes and both ears separately. So their ears can go this way and their eyes can go this way. And I mean, it's fascinating.
That is fascinating, actually. I did not know that.
Yeah, and I understood, what was the best side to take his photo, what was a head on, and a behind shot, and the lighting, and it was amazing.
That's awesome. How interesting, and we're going to continue the other story in a minute, but how interesting to have this subject like come to you. It's kind of a little
Yeah.
miraculous, you
And
know?
that's
It's
happened
awesome.
2 or 3 times, and it's always with moose.
They like you.
I think that's my spirit animal. That's what my daughters thinks, I'm just the moose whisperer, but I don't know about that.
So if you guys want to go photograph moose, then take Shauna with you because apparently she's the moose whisperer.
Yeah, evidently.
So you found this tiny calf moose. How old?
So The story of the tiny calf moose is sad, and yet it's also
Mm.
hopeful. I started because I track in the canyons in the summertime. The Forest Service, and I don't think it's BLM, it's Forest Service, has several camping places along the Logan River in Logan Canyon. And sometimes I'll go there and I'll be tracking, and I'll stop into the camp post and say, hey, have you seen anything? Or if you see anything, here's my card, call me, whatever. So I got this text one morning, actually this past June, early June, and this woman said, there's a calf moose just wandering around. And then I got another text from somebody that said, and sent a picture and said, I saw a cow moose and a baby moose, and they were separated. And I don't know what's going to happen, but I just thought I'd let you know. Well, I went out there, and the woman said, I saw I couldn't find them initially. And then the camp host said that the baby moose came out about 7 or 8 o'clock along the river. So I went out there at 5:30, I think, and I sat and I just waited and watched and waited to watch. And sure enough, this tiny little, he had to have been 2 days old, calf moose came out from the willows into the river. And he was just calling and crying
Oh.
and crying. And in fact, this morning I sent some of those shots to Save People, Save Wildlife, which is a organization out of Park City who needed some calf moose shots. But anyway, I just kept shooting and shooting, and he kept getting closer. And I'm like, Scott, we got to back up. Scott's my husband. So we backed up, but he just cried and cried. And I thought, there's something really wrong here, because a 2-day-old calf does not leave its mother. It's nursing. And I looked, and there's his umbilical cord still hanging down.
Oh.
And he looked at me with these eyes, and I don't know, my heart just sunk, and I thought something's not right. So then he wandered back off. And I went out for 2 days later, could never find him. But the second day of the 2 days, I was wandering down a trail, and I looked over, and there was a dead cow moose. And I went and looked. It was very early. No one else was on the trail. It was near that campground. It's not far off on a trail. And don't want to be too improper or anything, but all of her birthing mechanisms that are
Yeah.
inside of the body were completely outside of the body. So and oftentimes I will confer with the Department of Wildlife Resources here in Utah. There's a biologist who lives up here, and he and I will text back and forth on issues. And I said I found her because I let him know about the baby calf moose. And he said, yeah, let me go check it out. So he texted me later that afternoon. He said, terrible, terrible birthing complications. And she really suffered. And you could see that in the area of the grass around where she just writhed and writhed.
Poor thing.
And I took a death portrait because I wanted to honor her. Sorry if I get choked up, because those things happen in the wild. And I think we forget too much, humans, much less in the wild, the life altering, but just how precious life is in the birthing process, and how years and years ago, whether it be humans or wild, I mean, people were dying when giving birth. And so it's not an uncommon occurrence. I'm not sure percentage wise, especially for moose, but we never did ever find the little cow calf again. I'd like to think that nature took care of him, however that might be, and he's where he needs to be. So that's kind of my baby cow moose story.
Mm.
But it was pretty interesting. I learned a lot too about that process of moose that I didn't know.
Yeah, these kind of experiences, like, yes, you're observing the calf moose, the little baby, and the death of the mother, but I think these kind of experiences really do um it I'm assuming for you this kind of made you think about your own mortality. And
Exactly. That's part of it.
yeah, you even said how precious life is, because it is, right? It can be very fleeting. And that poor moose mom.
Well, and I think being out in the wild too, and we've talked about this before, but it's very healing for understanding the cycle and circle of life, and putting and keeping things in perspective. So it's not only, I find it was very healing for me in certain experiences that I had to heal from. I had a very difficult first marriage. I had a difficult divorce, subsequent custody case. My current husband also had a child custody case. We went through years where I look back now and I don't know how I'm still standing. But when my husband and I got married 15 years ago, about 3 years into the marriage, he said, I think you need to pick up a camera again. I know you enjoyed that, years ago, but I think you need to do it again. So I did. And then we moved back out here because he's from this area to Utah, northern Utah. It felt like home. And I started wandering. I started going up in the canyons. We started hiking. And I felt this sense of healing that I hadn't felt before, and a kind of freeing of anger and disappointment and all of those things that you have to deal with in life. And the earth and nature helped me heal. And when I think about it, I think there's this healing property that people, if they desire, can take advantage of by getting out into nature and observing wildlife, because the healing that can take place if you kind of allow your spirit to do it, whether it's the daily stresses of life, you're scheduling, you've got 3 kids you're trying to raise by yourself, or you have aged parents you're taking care of, or anything like that, the opportunity to find peace and heal from the stresses of major trauma as well as daily issues is there if you want to go seek it. So yeah, it's pretty amazing.
I agree. And it is so interesting. I find it, I mean, I'm not a wildlife photographer, but I find it so interesting, all of the things that I learn when I am out in nature, when and about myself, right? And about my relationships and the world around me. And you mentioned on your little form that you filled out, but you said you talk about these wild horses, and I'm curious about, well, I'd love to hear about the story about this, but I'm also curious, just from your little blurb, what you learn about relationships with people, or how even like people interact, or what we can learn from it. Anyway, I'll pause you if I if I have questions, but this is really curious to me. I really think it's interesting how how all wildlife has these social structures.
Oh, they do.
I mean, ultimately, we're animals and we have these complicated social structures, right?
Right.
And it
Right.
is really interesting what we can learn from animals about how to be better humans.
Well, the wild horses of Oniki they're in the Utah West Desert, and they're just amazing. There's a foundation, and I know 3 or 4 women personally who I've met through social media who spend hours and hours out there cataloging the horses, keeping track of them. The BLM is ultimately they work with and has the oversight over that area out there and the wild horses. But I think one of the most interesting experiences I had in the last couple of months, and I think this was in June as well, is I went out there, and I always go early morning. Evidently, the sunsets out there are gorgeous, and I ought to take the time to go at sunset. But early morning, there's literally no one out there in the desert at 7 o'clock in the morning. There's just not. So I found the northern herd of these wild horses who I'd photographed before, and so there's a dirt road, and the mountains are kind of on the west side of the dirt road, and the herd was on the east side, and I could see them kind of wandering towards the west side. So I drove my car around a position to where I would be able to shoot them with the sun at my back, and I could get them. And I noticed a watering hole as I pulled up. So I'm like, I bet you that's where they're going. So sure enough, they started wandering. This is 150 horses, something like that. Maybe not quite that many, but pretty close. And I'll be darned and I learned stuff all the time. I wasn't as well versed on experiences with these wild horses and social structures I am with moose and other wildlife, but there was like a leader, so it would have been the alpha male, I guess, and he stood at the top of the water hole, and these bands, so there's families within bands or groups of horses, and they each come in and take a turn, and there was kind of like a pecking order there, and the who could get in there, and then someone would signal and bray, I believe is the term, as to when they should get out, and the other band come in, And there were little tussles, on who stood in the water longer and who needed to move along. And it was amazing, and it all worked like they all worked together. They all knew that this was the way it was to be, and this is the way you get along. And again, they didn't always get along, but it just all worked and flowed so well. It was fascinating to watch, and I got some great shots in there, and really, really interesting experience. Those wild horses, they nuzzle each other. They fight. They let each other know. When they pair up, they kind of groom each other too a little bit. The mated pairs, and just really, really cool.
I would like to think in like a really perfect world, we're all paying attention to each other's needs and going, yeah, okay, I'll have everyone's thirsty here. I'll have my turn and I'll get what I need. And then you can have your turn. And when everyone's done, we can all go again if we need to. And we can, we can take care of each other. We can pay attention. And I just think that would be like in a little bit of a perfect world, we would pay attention more often.
Sure. And again, and it gets back to the human relations and connections. I mean, those
Mhm.
horses, they survive out in the desert together, and better together than alone.
That is
They just
true.
don't do well when they're alone. They just don't.
Yeah, that is so true. I think humans too. I mean, when humans
Hmm.
are put into places where they're completely alone, we don't do well.
Well, and I think COVID showed us that, right? When
Yes.
people were isolated, our relatives that were in assisted living centers were, they couldn't get past the glass. Children were kept home from isolated in school. I mean, whatever side of the philosophical or political aisle you were on during this, everyone can agree it greatly affected humanity.
Mhm.
And I personally don't think we've recovered from that yet. I think it's people learned that maybe they can do it alone, and I'm as much to blame as anybody else, because I actually enjoy the solitary life, being out in the desert or in the mountain by myself. And I do need to remember and be purposeful about developing relationships, because that's how I think we become better and we become deeper human beings, by those connections that are really important.
I completely agree, which is one reason I'm doing this podcast. I love the connection, and for me it's like personally satisfying to do this like one-on-one conversation, and then what's fun is I get to share that with other people, and so then other people feel, hopefully y'all feel connected to both of us that are listening
Sure.
because you get to listen to us.
Hopefully.
Okay, so I'm going to switch gears for a little bit. On my little questionnaire, I was like, tell me about a time that everything went wrong. Everything. and so, and you made a little bit of a mention about tracking and photographing this cow and calf moose. And I want to know about all the things that went wrong. Oh, Shauna, the cow, the moose whisperer.
Well, I this was this so and you may or may not know, but for those who don't live in this part of the country, we had a brutal, brutal winter this last year, between the end of 2022 and 2023. It was probably and my husband grew up in this area, so he said he didn't think it was outside of normal when he was growing up. But Utah has been in a drought for years and years. Great Salt Lake still hasn't recovered. I think right now the latest statistic I heard on the news was the state is at 77%. So there's only 30% that's still in kind of a drought. But this last winter, we had tons and tons and tons of snow. I
And you
mean,
needed it like desperately.
we needed it. We needed it. In fact, the joke in social media memes was like, please stop praying for snow. And this was like in April, because we were still getting
Oh my
feet of snow
gosh.
at the end of April.
And then there was the worry about what if it melts too fast and then there's
Well,
flooding.
exactly. Is it all going to melt?
That didn't really happen. It melted fine.
No. It metered, the weather
Thank
metered
goodness.
and melted it slowly enough that there wasn't really a whole lot of problems, but the entire state prepared, and there were some areas that got a little bit of flooding. But so what's happened the last 3 or 4 years is I've noticed in January, so the moose will go up in the wintertime, they'll do their thing and mate, and then the cow and calves will go off, and then the bull moose will go off together. They'll shed their antlers, and then they'll just kind of survive up in the mountains in November, December. January, they've been eating up there, and their body gets salt deprived. So they'll come down, and sometimes they'll go to roads where there's road salt. Sometimes they'll just find it in the flora and fauna near marshy areas, but their body craves salt. So they'll come down in these canyons. One canyon, particularly Blacksmith Fork Canyon, I'd noticed in the last 3 or 4 years that the moose would come down in January. So every January, everybody hates January, but I would get all excited because I can go track the moose because the imprints in the snow are much easier to find than on dirt or dry grass or something like that. So there's a one small little 2-lane road that goes through the canyon. It's a very intimate canyon. It's not like Logan Canyon where the walls are huge and on way side of a 4-lane highway with rivers on either side. But this is a more intimate canyon. So you can really, if there's wildlife there, you're going to see it. And it's going to be not very far from getting out of your car and maybe taking 10 feet off the road to find track. So I was going out probably the second week in January this year, 2023, and I noticed a set of tracks that were kind of off the side of the road, and they meandered on the road and then kind of off the road. And my husband and I were driving early one morning, and I looked out, and there was a cow and a calf behind an old cabin in a grassy area near where the river was off the road. And I thought, oh, how cool. And I looked, and I kind of could figure out it was a bull calf and a cow, a mother cow. And so at that point in January, usually the cows will bear calves in June, May or June. So worst case scenario, this calf was probably 6 months old, and he would not leave his mother's side. He just it was snowing. It was really cold, right? You're in almost negative degrees by this point in January. And I tracked and watched them 2 or 3 times a week for 3.5 months. So I got to spend hours and hours and hours again watching their behavior and watching them interact with each other and just watch that bull calf grow, right?
Did they notice you?
Well, I often wonder if that's the case. I think there's a lot to do with smell, because I know there's some beavers in a lodge that I go shoot at all the time, and they'll come up really close to me. I sit far enough back that I'm not interfering in their lifestyle, but they'll come up and they'll smell from the water. They'll stick their noses up. And the first or 2 times I went to shoot them, the female would slap the waters because she was being very territorial and warning me not to get too close or anything. But by the 3rd time or 4th time that I go up there every year, I can tell they're okay with me. So I don't know if it's my smell or my scent they recognize or something.
It must be. They're like, oh, that smell is just going to sit there and not do anything. It's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think they did. And I think it was a verbal thing this time, because this pair, I kind of named them. I called her Mama and I called him Junior. And so, when I'd find them, I'd go and say, hey, Mama, what's going on? Or, so it could have been my voice too. But the winter got really hard and the snow got deeper, even through February and March. And so I could see the calf maturing, because he'd start wandering off by March a little bit farther from his mother to browse and everything. And I could see him physically maturing. But I also noticed that she was getting weaker and weaker, and she wouldn't get up a lot when it came about towards the end of March. So I called, and then the other thing I noticed, both of them had terrible eye discharge, which is conjunctivitis, which I called and confirmed with the DWR biologist, because he came up and looked at him one day, and he said, yeah, it's a bad case of conjunctivitis, which moose get it like kids and humans get that pink eye, and then they share it with each other. So that's going to tax the body. He said he noticed that the biologist said he noticed the mother was laying down. She, looked like she was kind of not doing very well. And there's really nothing that we could do. So I just had to continue to watch and track. The last big snow at the end of April, literally, was almost the 1st of May. We got another 2 feet. And I went out to go check on them because I had something I couldn't get out there for like a whole week. So I went out. It had been a week since I had seen both of them. And sure enough, she had passed away. And I just found her and I just started bawling. And she was far enough off the road to where I couldn't, the snow was too deep. I couldn't get to her, because usually if I find, especially a moose, I will kneel down and I will touch them and just say kind of a prayer and kind of lift them up into heaven. It's just kind of my own special thing. And I couldn't get to her. And so it made it even more frustrating and depressing. But I couldn't find the bull calf anywhere. So I just thought, I hope he's okay and he's out off on his own. I did call the biologist. He came and did a necropsy. He found out that she literally had no fat in her body, that she literally had starved, and that she had winter ticks. So winter ticks are what kill most moose. And she had everything against her, right? Everything went wrong. She had a bad case of conjunctivitis. She had winter ticks that were just sucking the life out of her body. And then she starved because of the storm. That last storm, she just couldn't. So it wasn't a perfect world, that situation, the way it ended. I learned a lot. I developed a lot. But the best gift came at the very, very end, when I went back a month later just to see if her, carcass had disintegrated and whatever. It had started to be spring and all of the grass had grown up and the earth had swallowed her up. She had gone completely full cycle from being born in the wild in probably a grassy area to having the earth heal her suffering and take her in. And there was no trace left. It was amazing.
It's kind of like strange and beautiful at the same time to kind of watch this like full circle of life happen, because it is nature. We're going to, like, this happens, we're not really shielded from birth and all the beautiful life and also passing, and humans and animals.
And again, it healed me. It healed my sense of dread or worry about what would happen to her, or that there had been a death. It was a peaceful answer to grief. And it was really, really a gift and a really great experience that I'll always remember.
We're gonna picture that, her calf, as being a big, strong
Junior,
bull
I'm
moose
going to see
somewhere.
him someday. He's going to come down from that mountain and he'll recognize my voice. But he was the funniest thing. Personalities too. I think they have their own personalities.
Oh, yes.
When he was getting stronger and I guess she was getting weaker, he would kind of wander off on his own. And so I'd find him like a half a mile down the road, and he was trying to hide behind this rock one day. And I'd call to him and he'd kind of look up and then he'd get back down. And you could see his ears still, though, from on top of the rock. So he wasn't quite hiding well enough. And I have this picture of this set of ears that are on top of this rock. And I called it hide and seek because he was trying to play hide and seek. He was trying to do what moose do and be protective. And
I'm going to ask you to send that to me. I'll message you and remind me.
Okay.
And remind you.
Sure, absolutely.
If we could,
Absolutely.
like, I do blog posts for every episode, and I want to include that so that people can see some of the behind the scenes things. So
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely.
Shauna, I think it's really beautiful that you, and I don't know how often this has happened, but I think it's really beautiful that you honor the passing of these animals. It's almost like a celebration of their return to earth, and
Right.
with a photo. And I don't know, do you ever post these? Because I might just be tempted just to keep them to myself as like a little just a little memento personally, but I was just wondering if you do.
A couple of them I have not. I did take a death portrait of the mother who died with the wandering calf from earlier this year because It was early in the morning and the light was filtering through the trees on her face.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just a peaceful scene. And I just wanted to honor her that way. So I did take that one, and it's a really beautiful photo to me, and I remember getting quite a few compliments on it when I did post it.
Again, it's like that connection, even though she's gone, it's still like, it sounds like
Hmm.
through your photography, you make the connection, and then you help other people do that too.
I hope so. I think what you see through your lens and then through post production editing on things, your heart, it's kind of, the envelope is sealed with your heart when you've kind of tied everything up and gotten the photo to be just what you want it to be, and then share it with the world. That's kind of how I look at it, especially in these situations.
That's really beautiful.
Thank
I
you.
just want to end on that. Shauna, that was really beautiful. I really appreciate I'm like so glad you reached out to me and we could like share this time together. It was
Well, I
really lovely.
appreciate your willingness to do that. I was a little brazen in that, so but again, I just figure out if people, want to say no, that's okay. I'm fine with that. But the ones that say yes, it's another avenue for developing relationships that can selfishly help me grow, but also be able to help others learn and maybe express myself again, like we have done through conversation today.
Agreed. So, to finish up, what would you like to invite our audience to, or to know about you, or to go to? Is there anything that you'd like to share with our audience before we go?
Well, a couple things. They can always follow me on my social media posts. By Heart Photography, all one word, is on. I'm on Instagram, and then Shauna L Hart on Facebook. But I think just be open to what you might learn when you venture outside, whether it's getting in a kayak and going out on your local pond, or hiking up into the Tetons, or going into the Louisiana swamps in a kayak, or any of those things, is to open your mind and your heart into what nature might teach you on that experience.
Agreed. Or anytime you do photography.
Sure,
I think it's beautiful.
absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your time with us.
Thank you. It's been very enjoyable.
Same for me. And we'll include all these things. We'll put links in the episode notes as always. And that's it. So y'all, go have fun. Go make photos of whatever speaks to your heart, right?
Exactly.
All right, everyone. Thank you again, Shauna. We'll see y'all later.
Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye. Come with me on my next adventure. Be a wild woman and join me on one of my small group photography escapes in places like the cypress swamps of East Texas or White Sands, New Mexico. Go to wildwomanphotography.com for all the details. While you're there, you can check out featured wild women, episode transcripts, and more. Oh, and I'd love for you to support this podcast and all these incredible wild women in photography by leaving a review or sharing with a friend. Thank you so much for listening.